So, good morning, everybody. It is a great pleasure for us to have today Yael Feldman-Magor. Yael obtained her PhD in science education for the Weizmann Institute of Science. Her main interests include education technologies, self-regulated learning, learning analytics, and chemistry education. Yael is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Media Technology and Interaction Design Division at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And it is a great pleasure to have you, Yael, today with us. Thanks a lot. And we look forward to your presentation. So please go ahead.
Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present with participants from all over the world. I appreciate it. And then I will start with sharing my screen, and you will tell me if you can see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Let's make it also full screen. Yeah, perfect.
Full screen, you can see at the time. Okay. So the title that I gave to this presentation today is Transforming Science Education with Generative AI, Frameworks, Biases, and Future Prospects. So we will focus in science education, but many of the things that I will speak about are actually general to education. And I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at KTH and also a fellow in Digital Futures, which is a research center here in Sweden. And it's also like nice that you will be familiar with this research center. So this is why I present it. So today my plan is to speak about, I think, not 45 minutes, 40 minutes with the time that we have. And I will start with overview about education technology. And then I'm going to present you two articles, which are more perspective or concept. One of them is a perspective or conceptual paper. And the second is a evaluation study. And then I will summarize with future direction. I will tell you about my ongoing projects and will be happy to answer your questions. So if it's okay, can you hear me by the way? Okay, like the sound?
Everything is fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So question I prefer at the end, but if something is not clear, of course, that you can ask via chat or just ask in the middle, but general question about the papers, we will keep to the end. So if we speak about education technology, I usually like to look at this timeline, and I start with the radio, but actually we can start even before. And the idea is that every time that we have new technology, we think about how it's actually influenced about education. So what I usually like to do is that when we have something new is to go back and look on this timeline and think about all the influence and impact of technology of our educational aspect. For example, calculator, until the 70s, we didn't have calculators at class. And it's actually did some change in the way that we teach math or chemistry. So today we are in the today we are in the generative AI area, and we will speak about that. And when we have technologies, so sometimes technology actually designed with education in mind, and we have many simulations that present technology that actually the people who designed the technology thought about education. But sometimes we have technology that designed without education in mind, and we have the YouTube, which actually give a lot of accessibility to students. And now in these days, we have all these generative AI tools like ChatGPT that many of us started to use in the last 2 years. So I will start with presenting the conceptual paper, which I co-authored with my previous supervisors, Ron Blonder and Georg Alexandron. And the topic of the paper is perspective of generative AI in chemistry education within the TPACK framework. And here, because I know that we are here from many disciplines, please write me if the chat yes or no, so I will just know if you're familiar with this TPACK framework. So just click yes, no, so I will have a picture of your previous knowledge about this topic. I will wait a moment for that. Okay, so from what I wrote, so Gila wrote yes and the other no, so I'm happy that I can share with you the idea of this framework. Okay, so I will continue. So the question that we ask ourselves when we started to use and started to think how we can teach with generative AI tools is what knowledge should teachers possess to use AI-based generative tools like ChatGPT effectively. And then we went back to theoretical framework. So we have a framework that's called PCK, which is Pedagogical Content Knowledge, and actually developed by Schulman in 1987 in the 80s. And this framework actually focused on the integration of teacher knowledge in teaching. I need subject matters in order to teach something. And then with the rise of technology in education, there was a need to enhance teacher integration of technology in their practice to understand how they use in technologies. And then this PCK framework of the pedagogical content knowledge actually extended to another framework called TPACK, Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge, and it was suggested by Mishra and Kohler in 2006. And if I want to give you an overlook of this framework, the components, so we have the content knowledge, and if we want to teach something, we need to have basic understanding in the subject matter. For example, for me, it's chemistry. It can be mathematics, history, any subject. Then we need the pedagogical knowledge because we can be expert in subject matters, but maybe we will not know how to teach this subject. So we need to have strategies and methods in order to deliver and teach the subjects. Then we need to know how to combine them together to know how we can relate the specific method to specific content. For example, if I speak about chemistry, what I need a lab in order to teach, or maybe what's maybe good for group work or for just problem solving. And this is the pedagogical content knowledge that focus on the integration of teachers' knowledge in teaching. And then when we have the technology, we started to think about what is the ability of use technology to relevance specific in teaching. So this was the framework that actually developed in 2006 when we started to have all these social media, YouTube, online courses, all actually internet and web too. When actually users started to add content to the internet. But now we have the generative AI tools. But before that, I want to just present you how this TPACK was relevant to education. So basically, this framework helped to design professional development courses because we can use this component and make sure that in our professional development courses, we use the knowledge and the pedagogy and the technology, and the same with curriculum design. It's also helped for researchers to evaluate technologies and the use of technologies in education, and to develop new technology that need to be engaged with pedagogy content and the knowledge of the teachers. So, but this framework, we found that we have strengths because we have proven valuable. If you will look on education, technology, and researchers, so there is proof valuable on this framework, and it can be helpful. However, there are some criticism about this framework because we need better understand what exactly is the interaction among the knowledge components composing of the TPACK. What exactly is the use of technology? And this is why we actually see many studies that suggested to expand the framework every time when we have a new technology. And what we actually saw in the AI area, that many studies and researchers actually started to suggest extension. Even the researcher that suggested the TPACK, Mishra, suggested an extension last year in 2003. So what actually is special in the generative AI tools? It's basically enable us to create a dialogue. It's not like a Google engine when we search for something and then we need to evaluate if the information is correct or not correct, but this is what we have. With the generative AI tools, we actually have a dialogical process when we can ask questions, and if we are not happy with the results or the output, we can ask another question, we can give another example. So we actually have kind of dialogical process, and this is something that if we look at the TPACK, it gives us the way of how to use technology, but not all the literacy that required to use the technology. And this is what I'm going to show you now. So building on these studies that already expanded the TPACK, we actually expand the discussion to understand how we can relate the TPACK to use generative AI for science education. And the aim of, or the focus that I want to highlight is this bullet. So first, I want to demonstrate the relevance of PCK when applying generative AI to learning activities. And with this, I will say that our knowledge, if it's pedagogical knowledge or content knowledge, is super important if we want to use generative AI as teachers, educators, and even as learners. And also discuss the needs for additional literacy. And I will give you an example of which kind of literacy. And then I want to highlight that all the idea of prompt engineering, which is the discipline that developed for framing this kind of prompt for ChatGPT and other tools, is partially fall under TPACK, but actually required more literacy. So I will start with an example to demonstrate the pedagogical content knowledge. And with this example, we will not go through the whole prompt, but actually it was an educator that was finished to teach molecular anionic material, which is a subject in chemistry, and asked for ChatGPT to give him activities from the students. And basically, until this educator actually had a full activity that he can use, it takes 8 prompts. So here we can see the first prompt until the 6th. And if I will go to this slides, we can see that after prompt 8, the educator could say, thank you, it's better. So basically, the educator used the dialogical process in order to receive accurate and valuable information for the chat. And in order to do this, the educator needed the knowledge. He needed content knowledge in order to decide if the content that he received is correct or not correct. And also, it needs pedagogical knowledge in order to understand if the suggested activity is relevant to the teaching method. So basically, we have a problem when we use ChatGPT and other tools because we need to evaluate the information. And the solution is that our knowledge, the PCK, is still important when we use these kind of tools. And I emphasize this because many times that we speak about these tools, so there are some people that will say, oh, maybe do we need this kind of profession, or don't we need kind of professions? So I want to emphasize here that all the training of teachers and be expert in subject matter is still important. Then I want to show you the next example, which is not related specifically to this pedagogical content knowledge. And the next example is basically on bias. So with the use of AI tools, we need to be aware to many type of bias or inaccurate information that it's not specific for relate to the content. So in many tools, we will have something called gender bias or representational bias, and we need to know how to identify it. So in this slide, I actually show you a problem that gender and representational bias, but the solution here was actually that if we are aware, we can actually change this kind of bias through prompts. So in the first pictures above, we can see that the educators start and ask for generative from the ChatGPT 4 to generate a picture of a chemist, and then he received a male chemist, and then only after a few prompts, he actually received something more representative of a male and a female, but it took prompts, and actually he needed to be aware for this, because if he would not be aware for this, he would just take this picture of the male chemist and probably put it in his presentation or share it with his students. But if he is aware to the idea of gender bias, he can actually ask the more accurate or representative figure. And in the second picture, we actually see the same. At the beginning, when we ask from the ChatGPT, and the educator asks from ChatGPT to generate a picture of a chemist in a lab, he will give us again a white chemist in a traditional lab. But if we are more accurate and more specific with the prompt, we actually receive something that it's actually not a wet lab, but more computational chemist representative. And also after a few prompts, when we ask when you give specific information, we actually receive something that give us representative group of chemists. So the idea is, here I want to emphasize two things. First, the prompt, the way that we ask the information can change the output. And the second, we need to be aware for that, because if we are not aware to the idea of bias, or we will not receive this kind of figures because we will not ask them. And then for the third example is the reliability of sources. So we actually know that we are looking for information in the internet. We need to evaluate the information. It's not always true. And when we used to look at the internet, sometimes we can evaluate if the paper is from original research, or if we are trust on the specific website. But when we look for references from generative AI tools, we sometimes actually receive it like it's specific, it's a real paper, or the information looks reliable, but it's not. And it's our responsibility to evaluate it. So before that, I gave you an example with the content knowledge, that if we have the specific knowledge, we will evaluate the information. We will use our subject matter or pedagogical knowledge. But sometimes we look for information when we are not the expert, and we still need to evaluate if the information is reliable. So here I want to show you an example of teacher that actually looks for something that he was not super expert. I want to learn about chemistry students' misconception. Can you please provide me a list of references? And the chat actually gave a list of references that looks real, but and the educator also knew that this researcher is a real researcher, so it sounds like something that can be reliable. And also the journal of chemical education is a real journal. But then when we are looking at the specific paper, we see that it's not exist. And then we can continue with this dialogical process with the chat. And what actually the chat gave as an answer after that is that this researcher is actually exist, but the paper is not exist. And said, like, wrote that he apologized of that. So we need to be aware for this. Even if we see something that looks real, we need to really check it and use our literacy and how we evaluate information in order to use it. So with this example, I actually wanted to show you what I defined as a focus before, that teacher PCK, the pedagogical content knowledge, is critical to using generative tool to effectively and with responsible to our students. And we identified a prompt sequence that fall partially under the T component of the TPACK. So basically, TPACK is how to use technology. So if we know that the ChatGPT provided a dialogical process and we can ask questions, this is how to use technology. But in addition, just to know that we can ask questions and continue to give instruction to the chat, we also need to be aware for additional type of knowledge, such as the literacy to evaluate reliable information from the research, and also for bias, fairness, and other ethical aspects that are not part of this presentation, but we need to be aware for that. And also we want to emphasize the vital role of teachers' TPACK in effective use of generative AI application, and identify critical AI knowledge aspects that extend behind the current TPACK. So the TPACK is still relevant. We need to know how to use technology. We need our knowledge. We need our pedagogical knowledge, but we also need AI literacy that will give us the option to use technology in an effective way. So what we can be the implication and future direction for this conceptual paper. First of all, to more articulate what are the AI-specific dimensions that we need to include and extended the TPACK. Many of the researchers spoke about it in a broad way, but we need to be more specific and define it. emphasizing that AI literacy in professional development courses when we teach teachers. So mainly in their training, they already learn about the subject matter and the pedagogical, but when they taking now professional development courses, we need to think how we can incorporate AI literacy so they can use their knowledge and the generative AI tools, and further studies on integrative AI competencies into teacher knowledge frameworks. So this was the first paper that I wanted to present for you. And the second paper is something that I doing part of my ongoing work in this postdoctorate when I working with Olga Wiberg and Professor Olga Wiberg and Professor Teresa Sertor-Bergman. Olga is here from KTH and Teresa is from Stockholm University. And here we have a research about bias and fairness in education, in STEM higher education. But before, as a part of this research, we actually started to evaluate the generative AI tools, because in the first perspective paper that I presented to you, I just used ChatGPT as an example, but the landscape of all these tools is much more wide than the ChatGPT, and here we suggest a framework to evaluate all these tools. So it is something that we presented in a conference that was in September, ECTEL, and the name of the paper is Seeing the Forest from the Trees, Unveiling the Landscape of Generative AI for Education through 6 Evaluation Dimensions. And here the idea is that, as I said, it's not just ChatGPT, and AI tools like ChatGPT and Google Gemini are transforming teaching and learning. And we have some potential benefits: lesson planning, personalized learning, enhancing student autonomy, basically many things that we wanted to do before or do, but just in a more speed way or accessible way. But we have key challenges because there is bias, lack of transparency, ethical concerns, and basically there is still no standardization to use this tool. It's still ongoing. There are many discussions, but we still don't have a specific standardization. So if I can, and this is actually the gap that we found, that we wanted to understand and evaluate this tool. We didn't know what is the standard way. And the absence of standard framework actually led us to use previous taxonomy for evaluation educational technologies and adapt it to the generative AI use. So what we did, we actually did this process. We started with well-established taxonomy, which I will present you soon. And then we used research that combined top-down and bottom-up approach. It was a qualitative approach, because with the top-down approach, we actually adapted existing taxonomy for open educational resources that I also used it before. And then in the bottom-up approach, we tried to identify new evaluation criteria that we found through this tool. Basically, we evaluated 3 different generative AI tools. And when we did this evaluation, so we tried this tool, but also went to all this privacy statement and all this small letter that we usually not read, but we read them and saw what we can learn and evaluate from this, also from this information. So this is the landscape of the tool that we evaluated. It was a few months ago, and there are many more tools, so it's just example. And I will also say that these tools are developed. So when I'm looking on this landscape, I can recognize things that were not exist previously, but now they are exist in this tool, and I will tell you about it. So here is the dimension that we use to evaluate the technology. It was first the descriptive dimension, which basically give me the option, like, what is this tool? Is it for education? Is it not for education? Is it academic? Which type of the tool? And also, who is responsible for these tools? For example, if I use generative AI like ChatGPT, I need to know that it's OpenAI, or if it's something that belongs to Facebook or Google or all this big company. I want to know that this tool is associated and belong to this company. Then I want to see to check the pedagogical aspect, because I don't want to just use the tool because it's cool and it's innovative, but I want to see that there is actually potential for pedagogical aspect for the students. Then we have the representational dimension, because it's not just text or image, there is the audio also. Now we have this option to put our paper as a podcast or to hear the paper. So it's not just audio tapes, it can be also a video. And what is the specific contribution of this dimension to my students? Maybe if I have a student with kind of disabilities, it can help if I can make the information accessible also in a representational way, in a text and also in an image. And here I actually can say that this evaluation actually gave me to understanding of what actually is still weak in generative AI tools. So for example, in chemistry education, we use the technology in order to create simulation and to show our students how phenomena that we cannot really see in our eyes can be presented with technologies. But with these tools, it's actually still not accurate. If I asking from these generative AI tools, the landscape, to create me an image that will simulate me something with chemistry, it's still not accurate. So it's still a weaknesses of these tools, but probably in the future it will not be, but it helped me to identify this. The communication dimension. So when we used open educational research, the communication dimension was really strong previously. We have all these Padlet and forum boards that create communication between the students. But basically currently the generative AI landscape is still focused on the user. For example, learner, and the ChatGPT will be as his assistant. Or if I'm a teacher, the generative AI tool can be my assistant, but it's still not create a collaborative environment. Even that recently I started to see that there is something that go in this direction, but it's also helped me to understand what is the weaknesses currently of this technology comparing to previous technologies. In another research, I can share with you that students actually tell me that now they prefer to ask a question the ChatGPT or another tool and not a friend or a teacher if they're shy. So maybe it's okay, but it's still something that might reduce the collaborative work. Then we have also in the original taxonomy the scientific context, which is, if I relate it to the previous paper, it's actually our responsibility to evaluate the information, which was always exist. Also, when we use the internet, it's our responsibility to evaluate if it's accurate, if it's reliable or not. And here I can say that I saw a change, because, for example, there are tools like Perplexity that actually give us a list of references, and we can know exactly where which kind of sources was there in order to create our response. And with the ChatGPT, we still don't have it. But when I did this evaluation, I saw that many of the tools, that there are a few tools that actually wrote that it's our responsibility to evaluate the information, but in the ChatGPT back then, it was not there. And recently, I think just last week, I saw that there is a statement that the tool might make mistakes and we need to evaluate it. So it's our responsibility. So this actually gave me an option to compare what we have now to previous technology, and also to compare between technologies. But there was something missing, because this framework is not was not appropriate to evaluate all this bias and ethic that's provided by this tool. And therefore, we added the ethic and transparency. And now we have actually 6 dimensions of evaluation approach, because with ethic and transparency, we can also evaluate all this privacy statement and bias that's created by these tools. And we learned from it that it's not only for generative AI tools, it actually was there before, but we just didn't know or didn't pay attention for that. So I will give you an example. I will not go through this small table which give us all the percentages of how many tools, for example, have text, or how many tools have gender bias. I can share the presentation later for that. But I actually want to give you some specific example. So with the ethic and transparency, we actually identified the various bias. So it was gender bias in 23rd of the tools. And we also have representational bias and the content bias when the content was not accurate. But I also want to emphasize here that with the gender bias, we did not have just the regular gender bias when we usually have pictures of males like I showed you previously. But actually, some of the tools familiar with this bias, or we actually user wrote to them that there is a bias and then they try to fix it. So in one of the tools for a few months, we had the opposite kind of bias, which you actually, if we generate picture, it was just female pictures, like a female only world, which is also not accurate. So sometimes if we fix a type of bias, we can actually create another type of bias. Another thing with the bias is it's so complex that something that I will see as a bias, maybe another user from another culture will not see as a bias. So this is very super complex topics, but I just want to emphasize is that sometimes if we fix a bias, we actually created another type of bias. Another thing that we actually saw that it's really important for education is that when we did this evaluation, so only half of the tools explicitly state that the user are responsible to evaluate the information. Now there are more tools that give this statement, but back then it was less than half. And many of the tools actually not share with us which kind of model they use. It's kind of a black box. And sometimes if we use a tool, it's basically can be an application that is based on ChatGPT and not a standalone. And this is really important for us as educators or learners to understand, because this is the way our data is stored, and sometimes they can transfer the data to third party. Usually when we have all this privacy statement, many of us just click accept all and we don't read all these little words. But basically, if we will read these little words, we can see that this kind of data can be transferred to third party. Another two things that we need to be aware is the copyright issue. Copyright issue is important because if we preparing a paper presentation and we use the ChatGPT, we want to make sure that it's our copyright. If our students make something, we want to make sure that they have their own copyright. And with some of the tools, it's not clear. So there are some tools that can give you a specific statement that the copyright is belong to the user, but there are some tools that are not specific, and it's also something that for us as educators is really important to evaluate. Another thing is the age restriction. So for example, I usually work with higher education, but for teachers or educators who work with K-12, it's important to know, for example, ChatGPT do have age restriction. We don't always know it. We don't always read these little words, but we need to be aware when we give it to our students. And this is basically things that we saw only after evaluate these tools, but I can tell that it's now the copyright. It's really important with generative AI tools because we generate information, but all these privacy statements are also important to any kind of technology that we might use. So if I want to discuss and summarize, our approach is that educators and stakeholders need to critically assess generative AI tools before integrating them into their teaching practices. And there is a pressing need of tool developers to announce transparency and address biases. We need to be aware for this issue. In the current stage, another work that I'm working on that part is a scoping review, because I understand that the topic of fairness and bias is super complicated. As I presented before, something that I will consider as bias is not something that another person may be considered bias, and the opposite, and we need to understand the big pictures. And we also want to understand which kind of awareness teachers and educators have to understand this topic of bias. But for the evaluation tools that I showed you today, and when I'm thinking about future directions, so we try now to make it more simple, because I know that as educators or users or as learners, we will not always read all these privacy statement and like I read it for the evaluation. So we try to make it more accessible to end user, and this is another part of the research that we hope to promote it, to make it more accessible to end user, and maybe to create an index that can help us to evaluate this kind of tool in a more easy way. And I think that's all. We agreed that I will speak until 10:50. So this is my email if you have questions that you don't want to ask now, but I open and will be happy to answer any kind of question that we'll raise now.
Well, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. So now it's time for questions. There are some people who wrote on the chat. Let me go through those, unless these people want to talk, but so it says here, Raymond, kindly repeat the tool for evaluating references.
Do you mean the evaluation tool? I'm not sure that I understand the question.
If Raymond is with us, he should specify what he wants.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Yes,
For a nice wonderful presentation. I don't know if you can hear what I'm saying. It's also a tool. I think it's perplexity. Some colleague typed it in the chat. Perplexity, something like that. The one you talked about that is used to evaluate references.
Did you hear? I couldn't hear like what the question about the
it is very difficult for us to hear you. Can you repeat, please, Raymond? Otherwise, you can write on the chat.
Oh, can write me. I can just answer according to what I understand, and then if Raymond wants, you can send me an email.
Yes, yes,
but
please.
in general, the idea with the references is exactly why, like we usually evaluate, when we evaluate, for example, references from the internet, when I use Google Scholar and find an article, I usually open it. I need to evaluate if it's from a good journal or a respectable journal, but I know that the paper exist. With ChatGPT, the references are not always exist. I need to check them. And I need to check the information, even if it's not the references, if it's accurate or not. So I need to use my my knowledge, also the knowledge that I have, in order to evaluate if it's true or not. And if I don't have this knowledge, so I need maybe to look for the information in another resource to evaluate if it's relevant or not. I hope that it was answered the question about the references, but Raymond, if it's not, so just send in an email and I will try to answer more accurately.
Very good. Inzi Khan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for your insightful presentation. I'll be asked two questions related to the presentation that you have already presented it. The first one question is that I'm focusing on generative AI from last few months. So the problem that I'm seeing that students are using their own approach related to generative AI tools, and teachers use their own approach. So we do not have any clear communication between students and teachers currently. So how we will be ensure this communication between teachers and students? And for the second one, how we will be ensure the academic integrity in education, especially a lot of time my own teacher use generative AI tools, but when it come to us, they do not allow that you are not allowed to use such type of tools. And the third question is related to detection of generative AI tools. Currently, we have different generative detection AI tools such as Chat 0GB2, and other tools, but these are not reliable tools according to the academician on LinkedIn that I have read the post of them, such as Ethan Malik and other. We have a lot of researchers and academicians. So they do not force teachers and also advise to the teachers that you do not check the assignment of students on these tools because these are not reliable. We do not have any specific criteria or maybe standardized criteria for it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for raising the question. I have to say that not all question, I didn't cover this question in this specific presentation. Like it was not part of this conceptualization or the evaluation. Here we focus more on the educators, but I can tell you, can answer based on my knowledge and based on other ongoing research that we need, of course, to create a collaboration between students and the educators. And it's also not depends only on educators and students, but also in the policy of the academic institutions. So there are some academic institutions that currently actually give the students option to use the generative AI tools and give the educators the option to use. That are some academic institutions that do not give this, but many of the institutions are actually work now on the policies. So I guess it will take a few months, years until we have something more organized. And there are some in another study that it's currently ongoing. So at least in Sweden, so educators told me that they give their students the option to use ChatGPT as long as they wrote at the end that they use it and for what purpose. So it's like when we now, of part of the journal, submit academic papers, we need to notify if we use it or not. So it's the same kind of the students. And then it's the question like AI detecting or use it for proof English. So I think it's still conversation that are ongoing. There wasn't a case study of AI detecting that they just blame students that she used something with AI, but she actually didn't use. So it's very complicated. And I think like it's good that we are doing this kind of discussion and presentation, and there are many other discussions. So we finally will have the solution for that. But I can also say that it's here with us for a few years. I think that we also almost 3 years since ChatGPT released, but or 2 years, but in general, we are still like early adopter, and in the future, more and more people will use it, and students will use it. So we will need to integrate it in education according to the initial phase that we are now started to do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Let's see. Hubertus, would you like to state your question, or should I read it from the chat?
No. I can. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can talk to you. I have first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Also, the 2 articles that you discussed, and I'm going to look at them later on. I have a very concrete question. There's been an evolving discussion at my institution in 2 academic writing classes on whether or not students should be permitted to use tools like Consensus or Semantic Scholar or similar, AI-based databases that seem to be replacing, the manual Prisma-based process of doing a systematic literature review. I was wondering if you could share your opinion on such a concrete question.
So actually, Semantic Scholar was one of the tools that I was originally looked at, but it was not included in the paper because it was not, I think, generative AI tools more. But anyway, I looked at Semantic Scholar, so I can answer you based on that because I did this evaluation for this tool. So basically, it can be a good tool, but we need but it's like the database is limited. It's like we need to know. It's not like create all the database from Web of Science or Google Scholar. So student needs to know that they have limited access to information. It will not cover all the information they might needed. And also something that we can look when we summarize information, like from the summaries that Semantic Scholar give us, or even like something called ChatGPT PDF. it's actually not give us all the critical thinking about the paper. It can give us a summary, and it can bring us the limitation that we have from the papers. But at this stage, it's not give us the all critical thinking that we can, just a second, Gila, that we have, but maybe in the future when we can have when we can have like a bunch of papers, it can give us. I think that for the podcast, it do give us information from other papers, but so it's a big question, but I think that we just need to be aware. So if educators, students will be aware for all these kind of limitation biases and will use it in a responsible way, so we can use it. But it's maybe required workshop or courses to know or integrate in the courses the way to teach it. Gila, you wanted to comment something? Or
yeah, thank you. This is a great question, but you know the challenge is much more. I don't know if you saw the recent Elicit. It integrated Prisma and it makes the literature review from scratch. So the challenge is much more than saying it's limited and we have to teach them. It makes it really good one. So we have to think more than just this limitation. We have to think, how do we convince the students that they need to read? And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. So you can say you're not allowing it, but you know, I saw Elicit did. I have a student, a PhD student, so I just compared what he did to by Elicit. It was whoa. So it's a problem, and we still don't have the answers.
Okay, I think that I agree with you that like it's going to develop so fast and we cannot have the answer for everything. I guess that at this stage we need to discuss and teach our students, but also probably that we'll have some issues that will be part of our life. Today we cannot tell students don't use Google, don't use YouTube, even if it's not cited from Wikipedia, but we also like it's more reliable than it was like 15 years ago. So like I think that if I can like think what I'm thinking about, Gila comments, your question, and my answer is that we need to be aware and to like sometimes the students even faster than us, and we need to like also learn all the time and to know what exists. And the evaluation that I did was in around April, May, and I'm still like follow up this tool and they continue to develop. So sometimes I need to update something in the specific criteria, which is from plus from minus become plus or another option. So I guess this is the answer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So any other questions or comments? Well, it is obvious that we have some exciting times ahead of us. I don't see any questions. So, I'm sorry. There is one question. What? They got confused. Let's see. Do you think prompt engineering will become an integral part of future curricula for students, especially as AI and language models continue to evolve in education? Says Inzi Khan, Yael.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we will call it prompt engineering or if we will call it in a different way, but I think that all this dialogical process that make us to be encouraged to be active, criticize the chat, ask more for more information will be part of the skills that we will need to teach our students. And I don't know, maybe in the future the chat also can ask us questions, so it will be like more interactive. But I think it will be part of skills that we will need, like to know sometimes to ask the right questions and not just ask like give me a solution. If I, as a student, will ask, for example, from the chat, just give me a solution, I will not learn. But if I will know how to ask a question, if I have motivation to learn, so it will be probably with good results. So I think that these skills will be part of our curriculum, if it will be in the course or specific one, but it's something that we need to think about it.
Okay. There is another question on the chat. What are the future research trends for Gen AI in education?
Well, it's a big question. I think there are so many directions. Like I took the direction of pedagogy, fairness, and ethics, and there are more technical direction, more pedagogical direction, different kind of level. If it's elementary school or higher education, specific content. So collaborative learning. There are just so many directions that I guess that every researcher, according to his interest and expertise and the gap that he identified in the literature, can continue the research. If anyone wants to share from his research, or a research, I can forward the question also to the audience.
Very good. Any more questions? Well, in that case, thank you so much for your nice presentation, Yael. And thank all of you. Many thanks to all of you for your questions and your participation.
So,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity, and it was great to see you all.
Yeah, it was same for us. Thanks a lot again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.